What if I told you that a luxury watch isn't just an expense? What if it's actually a portfolio you can wear on your wrist? Well, today we're going to dig into a fascinating investment philosophy, one that sees these high-end timepieces as real, tangible assets, things that are meant to hold their value way better than plain old cash. So let's get into how this whole idea works. Okay, so to really get this mindset, let's start with a simple choice. Imagine I'm holding two things out to you, a crisp $10 bill and a dusty old 1964 silver half-dollar. Which one do you take? Now, according to the source material we're looking at today, the smart money, the educated choice, is the silver coin. Why? Well, the argument is that one of those is just government-printed paper, while the other is a physical, precious metal, something with real built-in worth. And believe me, that choice right there, it's the absolute core of the philosophy we're unpacking. So here's how we're going to break this all down, in 5 parts. First up, we'll dive into what the source calls the fake money problem. Then, we'll look at the solution, wearing your wealth. After that, we'll dissect the anatomy of a watch asset, take a peek inside a billionaire's watch box for some wild examples, and we'll wrap it all up with the investor's mindset behind it. All right, let's jump right in with part 1, the fake money problem. And look, according to the source, you have to get this concept because it's pretty much the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. So you're probably wondering, what on earth do they mean by fake money? Well, when the source uses that term, it's talking about something very specific, government-printed currency. The argument is that it's basically debt that is designed to lose its value over time. And to give you an idea of the sheer scale of this, the source points to a pretty staggering figure. It claims that $1 trillion in new currency gets printed about every 90 days. And this rapid flood of new money into the system, well, that's presented as the #1 reason why you'd want to convert that currency into something, physical. And this brings us to a really old economic idea called Gresham's law. The way the source interprets it is actually pretty simple. When bad money, that devalued currency, floods the system, the good money, we're talking things with real intrinsic value, it gets hoarded. It just disappears from circulation. People start hanging onto their gold, their silver, and, as we're about to see, other very specific tangible assets. Okay, so if fake money is the big problem, then what's the solution? Well, that brings us right to part 2, wearing your wealth. And honestly, this quote from the source material just nails the core idea. The point is, a luxury watch isn't just something you wear. It's a way to turn that currency into a physical asset that you can take anywhere. And it's totally discreet. Yeah, just look at this comparison. On one hand, you've got a smartwatch. It's tech, right? Its value drops like a rock, and in a couple of years, it's basically obsolete. But then you have the gold Rolex. That's viewed completely differently, as a store of value. Its worth is literally tied to the gold it's made of. It's an asset that, the source argues, can stick with you even through major financial trouble. Okay, so that leads us to part 3. Let's actually break down the anatomy of a watch as an asset. What is it that actually gives these things their lasting value? Well, according to this philosophy, it all comes down to 3 key drivers. First up, and this one's the most obvious, is intrinsic value. This is exactly what it sounds like. The value that comes from the stuff the watch is physically made of. We're talking gold, platinum, diamonds, you name it. So for example, a gold Rolex Daytona is described as holding God's money because it's made of physical gold. Then you've got something like a Hublot Big Bang, which gets its value from having over 1,200 diamonds. And then for something truly out there, the Louis Monet Meteoris literally has bits of rock from the moon and Mars inside of it. I mean, you can't just print more of that stuff, right? All right, the second value driver is rarity. And this is just basic supply and demand. It really boils down to one question. How many of these things are actually out there? And the Patek Philippe 1518 is just the perfect example of this. See, for this super high-end model, gold was the normal material. But they made a few in stainless steel, and that was so unusual, so rare, the collectors went nuts for it. It drove the auction price to over $11 million. So here's the kicker. Sometimes the less precious material is actually the one that's way, way more valuable. Okay, and the third driver is a little more abstract. It's intangible value. And this is all about the human element, the incredible craftsmanship, the mind-boggling complexity, and just the sheer skill it takes to build one of these things. I mean, just look at the Vacheron Constantin 572060. There's a reason they call it the most complicated watch ever made. It has 57 different functions. or complications as they say in the watch world, and it's built from over 2,800 tiny individual components. Its value isn't just in metal, it's in the monumental human genius it took to design and build it. It's basically a masterpiece of engineering that you can wear on your wrist.
All right, now let's get to the really wild stuff. For part 4, we're going to see what happens when you take all these ideas to their absolute extreme. It's time to look inside the billionaire's watch box.
At this level, we're talking about watches that are way less about telling time and way more about being like a portable treasure chest. You've got pieces that are basically just pure jewelry, like the Chopard 201 carat. Others are literally historical artifacts, like the watch made for Marie Antoinette. And then you have these incredible design marvels, like the Fascination, where a giant diamond actually pops off to become a ring. Insane. And to really get a sense of the scale here, let's just talk numbers for a second. The Jacob & Co. Billionaire Watch. That's not just a clever name. This thing is covered in 260 carats of huge emerald-cut diamonds. Just let that sink in.
And the source puts this into perspective in a really interesting way. It calculates that if you took the money this watch is worth and invested it at, say, a 7% return, it could spit out $1.3 million a year in interest. So you see, it's not just a shiny object, it's framed as a massive capital asset.
And then, at the very, very top, the absolute peak, you have the graph hallucination. We're talking about a valuation of $55 million. At that point, it's not really a watch anymore, it's more like a sculpture made of insanely rare colored diamonds that just happens to also tell you the time. So where does all this leave us? That brings us to our final section, the investor's mindset. What's the big takeaway here? You know, this final quote from the source really wraps up the entire philosophy perfectly. The goal isn't just to stack up cash. The goal is to turn that cash into real, tangible assets that the government can't just print more of. Whether that's real estate, gold, or, in this case, a little engineering marvel that you wear on your wrist.
And so to wrap up this whole explainer, the source leaves us with one last, really thought-provoking question. The argument is that our assets are a kind of communication. They speak a language of value. So it makes you ask yourself, in the language of money, what is your portfolio saying?